Nietzsche is usually taken up as a kind of patron saint for this new historicism.
Mm-hmm.
There's an essay by Foucault called Nietzsche Genealogy History,
Mm-hmm.
in which he tries to say, we need to do genealogies the way Nietzsche did. But in fact, Nietzsche said that he was not doing a genealogy. He was polemicizing against the idea of doing a genealogy. And then Foucault said, we need to adopt Nietzsche, but we can't adopt his concern with freedom.
All right. Well, welcome to the Cutrone Zone again. With me today, as always, the last Marxist, resident track coach, resident genius, Chris Cutrone.
Hey, Doug.
Hey. So, I'm eager to talk about your article in Compact, What Musk and Trump Still Have in Common. It's an interesting piece, and it's, for me, the whole thing, all of it really leads up to your final line.
Yep.
Can capitalism be only the means and not the ends for humanity, or must humanity only be the means for capitalism? I'm surprised, no offense here, but I'm surprised Compact took this, because it isn't, it's very much a walk through just the objective reality of both Musk and Trump. It doesn't come down on one side or another very much.
Right.
And it ends with a kind of larger Marxist point.
Yep.
And yet they liked it. So
yes. So it was solicited.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had 4 articles solicited, 3 published by Compact this year: Greenland, Gaza, the tariffs, and now Musk.
Mm-hmm.
And, so they rejected the tariffs article, but they accepted this one. And I kind of deliberately made this a little bit more toned down than the tariffs article.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote it also in the mode of my Gaza article for them, which is journalistic.
Right.
Meaning I wanted to, string together a bunch of facts and sort of images and, just sort of lay things out in such a way as to present reality. And, not really get too deep in the weeds of interpretation, because, ultimately, who knows what's going on, really, right? Mm-hmm. We have to sort of take people at their word. And, we have to, deal with the public phenomenon of this breakup between Musk and Trump. I also decided, Alex Gurevich had sort of stung me a little bit with the criticism after the Gaza article, where he said, oh, Chris Cutrone just, as smart as he is, he just contributes to the discourse. And so I thought I'd lean into that a bit, actually. I decided rather than resist it, I'd lean into it. And so I'd lean into it, and I'd use Bannon as a kind of a informant or foil, like the self-styled, like true MAGA person, right? Mm-hmm. And so, more journalistic, but also trying to get something across very fundamental about both capitalism and politics. And that's the means-ends problem, and also the who-whom problem. So I knew that that's what I was going to be doing, meaning, why is Musk involved in politics at all? Why is Trump involved in politics at all? Like these guys don't need it, as Trump puts it. Like they don't need it. They don't need to be in the political sphere, but they are. Mm-hmm. And obviously Trump is a much more serious political figure than Musk.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Musk clearly aims to be political. And so there's this whole question of like the businessman who gets involved in politics. There's the Ross Perot phenomenon from back in the day. There's Michael Bloomberg. There's Steve Forbes. There have been these candidates. I mean, in some ways, Mitt Romney is like a figure along these lines, and yet also he's, he was a senator, and he was a governor. So, it's what do we even mean by capitalist politics? And what are these guys trying to accomplish through the political sphere? Are they just serving their self-interest, like lining their pockets? I will always remember that Obama said that Trump didn't even want to be elected, that it was a kind of a monstrous accident, that all that Trump wanted to do was raise the profile of his brand of hotels.
Right. And get the ratings up on The Apprentice, maybe.
Yeah, well, he had been out of The Apprentice, though, right?
Oh, he was. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he was already gone. And so, and I just thought, that was super lame by Obama. But I also thought Obama wasn't just saying that. Obama, at some level, believed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, this is a problem right here, which is, how do we even think about politics? That it has to be just venal self-interest.
Howard Stern said the same thing about Trump.
Sure.
Not as,
sure.
not as important a political figure, but a
Still.
friend of Trump's, right?
Sure. Still, that's right. Well, someone who turned against Trump.
Right.
Right. And, so I feel like, the other thing about Musk is that, he's this kind of tech bro, he's in this world of like venture capital, like the All-In podcast guys,
Mm-hmm.
They like supposedly accidentally, how could it possibly have been accidental, didn't post their podcast the week that the rupture happened between Musk and Trump.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it seemed to be telling. Like, it seemed to be a mini political crisis in that milieu.
Right.
And, at the same time, we know from the first Trump administration that there's this kind of cast of characters that come and go, and people leave Trump's orbit and denounce him. And, and that was Trump's interpretation. Trump's interpretation is, he doesn't know what happens to people. As soon as they leave his orbit, they, see things completely differently. And he chalked it up, I think, to they get used to the limelight, and then when they're without it, it's like a crisis for them. Which is probably true of, like, I don't know, Omarosa or Anthony Scaramucci, these kinds of people, whatever, right? But anyway, but Bannon, even though he was kind of banished from the first term early on, has remained a kind of a true MAGA believer. But obviously Bannon is trying to use Trump for his agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So, part of what they did with Compact, I should say, so they did edit it, not terribly, but they did cut down a lot where I was saying a lot more along the lines still in the article about how no one pays attention to Trump. They try to interpret Trump through the figures around him. So everyone is the actual puppet master behind Trump. It's Bannon, it's Stephen Miller, it's now Elon Musk.
That seemed more plausible in 2017-18 than it does now.
Yeah, but I always knew, basically, like Bannon as chief strategist, like, I knew that he was Ted Cruz. He was a Ted Cruz guy. He was a Tea Party guy, and Trump was not. Right. So all the standard interpretations are that, Trump is finally the candidate the Tea Party needed or something. And it's like, no, actually, Trump is not a Tea Party person. Obviously, like Paul Ryan. He just was not a Tea Party guy. And he wasn't Ted Cruz either.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was the final candidate against Trump, if you remember, in the primary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The Zodiac Killer.
Right. Well, also his father killed JFK.
Yeah, that's right. Both those.
According to Trump, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, because those Cubans. Anyway, no, the thing is, if you actually pay attention to Trump, then it's clear that he's not these things. He's not Tea Party. He's not, Steve Bannon. He's not whatever. He's not J.D. Vance. You know, and he's not Elon Musk. He's not like a oligarch libertarian either.
Right. Yeah. Musk is interesting because I do think that he demonstrates how the Silicon Valley tech bro mentality just is not going to totally
Rule.
dominate our
Yeah.
culture, right?
Right.
There's a limit to it.
Oh yeah.
Like Joe Rogan might be able to run for president someday, but not Elon Musk. You know what I mean? Like there's
Right.
a disconnect there. But what I wanted to ask about is you were talking before we started recording about how maybe this is related to the fact that people don't want to think about Trump himself. You were talking about how Vivek Chibber
Yeah.
was saying that it turns out that Trump is not a populist or not some sort of
Change figure.
radical change figure, but rather is just another regular old Republican in the same style as, say, Mitt Romney or George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan. And
Still a
you could,
neoliberal.
right,
Still
still
a
a neoliberal.
neoliberal, and also I think that so. This is an interview that he did with Paul Prescott, published in Jacobin. They spent a lot of time digesting the term neocon, right? And so I think that what Chibber does, he tries to burnish his leftist bona fides by saying, actually, the whole establishment is neocon, right? There are like the neocons proper, but then neocon just means consensus U.S. foreign policy, which is the same. It's bipartisan, it's across the board, and Trump is just that.
Right, and you know who would agree with him is Robert Wright from the New Republic.
Sure.
Who like to talk about the blob, right? So
the blob, yeah.
Right, which to me that's just a certain kind of progressive liberal that would think that way, rather than a left-wing person.
That's right, but I think that what he was at pains to do is say that he was saying that Trump is a typical Republican president, but that doesn't mean that the Democrats are really any different.
Right.
Right. And so I think that that's the pose now, right, with respect to the DSA, is that they're vigilant about the Democrats making any concessions to Trumpism. And of course, if they recast it as not concessions to Trumpism, but just status quo bipartisan consensus, and therefore just your typical Democratic Party conservatism, whereas they are, standing for something else. And so the one exception that he makes is Afghanistan. And he makes a strange claim, which is that maybe if Trump had been reelected, he would not have withdrawn from Afghanistan, ultimately. Right? And then it's left a little bit ambiguous why Biden pulled out. In other words, it's kind of it's a very threadbare kind of argument. It's lame, it's tendentious, it's not really a serious analysis or interpretation. So, because obviously Obama had really withdrawn from Iraq. There was still some presence in terms of the fight against ISIS, but really, I think that Trump opportunistically blames Obama and Hillary for ISIS because of their withdrawal from Iraq. It left a hole open for ISIS to fill, right? And then Trump is very proud of having defeated ISIS or whatever, right? In 5 weeks, whereas they said that it would take 5 years, right? But, so he definitely wanted to finish the withdrawal from Iraq, which also strangely did not happen, meaning there are still U.S. troops in Iraq, who are there subject to being missiled by Iran when they have these, kerfuffles. But he did get out of Afghanistan, and in that respect, Afghanistan was the occupation that remained at the end of the Obama term. The last of the forever war situations was Afghanistan.
I always give George W. Bush credit for withdrawing from Iraq because the timeline was the one he
surge.
Had set.
Yeah, the surge.
Right. He
and
set
then the
that
eventual withdrawal.
Right. And there's if I'm remembering correctly, there was a moment where a journalist in Iraq threw his shoes at Bush.
Yeah.
And I think that was the same meeting where he was announcing the timeline for
for the drawdown. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
And all Obama did was stick to that schedule.
Absolutely. In other words, in some ways you could say it was the blob, but maybe it wasn't the blob. Maybe it is more political. And they also like shaved down. I had there's still a paragraph on the bombing of Iran because I wanted to take the opportunity to say something about that in print, and they kind of simplified it. They kind of took a lot out, because I just pointed out, as I did with you in the last Cutrone zone, that Trump kind of dispensed with the bombing of Iran, meaning he did it so that now it's no longer an item on the menu. Meaning, okay, you guys are going to push me to bomb Iran. Okay, let's just do it, and then you can't ask me to do it anymore because it's done. We did what we could do. Interestingly, I think that Chibber, for example, but also other people, think that somehow there's an ongoing war now, that Trump has launched a war against Iran that is somehow ongoing, which is just preposterous. Like, it wasn't a war. It was a single action, and it's done.
Right.
But no, instead it's like, oh, he's launching a new forever war. See, he's a neocon. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? The thing is, Doug, at a certain level, so I talked about leaning into the discourse. But obviously I can lean into the discourse to the extent where I just accept the North Korea-style propaganda that we're faced with, where it's just unbelievable. And obviously the Democrats are trying to push on what they see as weakness in the MAGA coalition. Right? If they can paint Trump as beholden to the blob, the deep state, right? The bipartisan consensus, then they can alibi themselves and they can chip away at his support.
I want to push back a little bit on this, not too much, but just say when the bombing happened, I don't think I told you last time we spoke, I watched the news and I saw a spokesperson for Trump and a peacenik within the Trump administration. The people who were disappointed, one of the people was disappointed that the bombing had to happen, right? And who did say, like, this is really what's going to happen next is really going to be up to Iran.
Well, they have to say that,
right? And if there is a major response, an escalation, then we will, of course, do whatever we have to do. And so there was in that moment, there was a feeling that it could possibly have led to something much bigger than what it turned out to be so far.
Maybe bigger. I'm not sure how much bigger. I think that I mentioned to you that, back in the Reagan era, there was like a kind of a conflict between the U.S. and Iran over like the oil platforms in the Persian Gulf. And like the U.S. was, blowing up the Iranian Navy, and then they also accidentally shot down an Iranian airliner because they thought it was a plane coming to attack one of the American ships in the Persian Gulf. A horrific event. And, perhaps a war crime on the part of the United States in the sense that, negligence. I don't think that they intentionally shot down an airliner, but I think that they might have done better in not having done so,
Right. Yeah. They could have paid more attention and not been so quick on the trigger, basically.
Yeah, or something. It was, but look, the military people, how sophisticated can we expect them to be? So, Fazel's Malaysian, and a Malaysian airliner was shot down by Putin over Ukraine.
Right.
Right. Was that intentional? No. Was it criminally negligent? Yeah. But this shit just happens. Meaning you have a war. That's it. So what the U.S. did back then was they did attack some Iranian bases. They did the kind of thing that Clinton was doing in Iraq under the sanctions regime. And so that would be the other situation would be, okay, well, now is Iran just in the crosshairs for whatever, actions. I don't know if you remember back in the day when Reagan bombed Libya
Mm-hmm.
in response to Libyan-supported terrorism in
I
Europe.
do. I remember that.
And so I love this story. So the story is that they launched, it was F-111 fighter bombers, vintage like Vietnam era planes, from England or from Britain, somewhere, maybe Scotland. France denied them flyover, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they had to go all the way around Spain to attack Libya. One of the planes crashed as a result of having to take the extra mileage. And the US bombed the French embassy in Libya.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, you know, I feel like if that happened now, people would be like, oh my God, multipolarity. Do you know, like they would just lose their shit. They'd be like, oh, Eurasia is asserting itself, you know, or something, and the US is fighting back, you know? And it's like, no. This is just what happens. I think that they also bombed the Chinese embassy in Serbia, Clinton, because the Chinese said something about being opposed to the NATO intervention. And so, for good measure, the US just bombed the Chinese embassy in Serbia. I think it was during the Kosovo campaign. And so, you know, I mean, it's war, it's politics, though. It's politics. And that's what I've been, you know, trying to maintain emphasis on. I mean, look, it's obviously the millennials are scarred by the war on terror. And the war on terror is big. It's big. It's comparable to Vietnam, in fact. You know, taken as a whole, the war on terror is like the Southeast Asia campaign that the U.S. fought. And so, you know, it scarred a generation. I get it. However, this is not a continuation of that. You know, and also, you know, obviously I've had to, in a more implausible way, but still maintain that the Gaza war by Israel is political. Which, calling it a genocide means you put it beyond politics. And I always want to emphasize the political character of these things, which doesn't mean that it's not a humanitarian disaster. It is. But what we have to understand is that the world is such that there are millions and billions of people who can just be the roadkill of politics. You know? And I don't mean politics like Netanyahu trying to stay in office to avoid prosecution or something like that. Like, not lame like that. You know? But rather, you know, Hamas is a political actor. Israel is a political state. Netanyahu and his coalition are a political phenomenon. The United States is a political actor. Biden, Trump, you know, these administrations. It's politics. And I feel like what happens is that people take an excessively cynical view about these things. And, you know, to get back to why even I included the Iran bombing in the article on Musk. Well, a couple of things. I wanted to take the opportunity in a journalistic sense, but also, you know, one of the things that Trump did right after he got elected was send Musk to talk to the Iranians. And I thought that was significant. And I thought that why he would choose Musk to do that is because Musk had already been a very public dissident against U.S. policy in Ukraine. Meaning it was a signal to the Iranians, okay, this incoming administration is going to do things differently, is not going to listen to the foreign policy establishment, is going to act outside that scope. And Steve Witkoff has represented that. And a lot of people have said that the fact that he's an amateur and he doesn't know what he's doing is actually a great asset because it creates possibilities that wouldn't otherwise be there. Right? So, you know, in that way it was connected. And also just in terms of the grumbling in MAGA about these things, I think that Trump said, about Tulsi's intelligence report on the nuclear weapons program in Iran that it didn't really exist. And he said, well, if Tulsi said that, she's wrong. And I thought, okay, we're not talking about facts here. This is not facts. This is politics.
Mm-hmm.
Because unfortunately, the Iranians are in a very similar position to Saddam Hussein, which is that it serves them to have strategic ambiguity about whether they're developing nuclear weapons or not.
Right.
And so it's all politics. And I think that rather than the humanitarian angle, which immediately gets lost in the weeds and gets distracted by the facts, we have to keep our eye on the ball. And what's really going on is that Trump, and mainstream commentators have said so, Trump wants a peace deal with Iran. In other words, he doesn't only want a deal on the nuclear issue. He wants normalization.
Right.
He wants normalization. Now, that's not what they wanted from Saddam. They did not. That's the difference. They did not want that. They wanted to get rid of Saddam. They're not doing that here.
Right.
They had already compromised the sovereignty of Iraq with the no-fly zones.
Mm-hmm.
They already were, like the Kurds were already de facto independent.
Mm-hmm.
The Shia were still vulnerable, but still, under a no-fly zone protection.
Mm-hmm.
Not that really mattered at a political level the way it did for the Kurds. But, Iraqi sovereignty was on the chopping block, we might say. Certainly the Ba'athist regime. Before 9/11. Before the War on Terror.
Mm-hmm.
And so this situation, of course, does the U.S. want to get rid of the Islamic Republic? Sure. But in the meantime, politics.
Right.
And so it also goes beyond the Libya situation, because that's the other thing that people will raise. They'll say, okay, Gaddafi abandoned his, strategic weapons program, his, whatever nuclear ambitions, but also chemical and biological weapons. And all that did was leave him open to being deposed and killed.
Mm-hmm.
This is different. Iran is different. Iran is much bigger than Libya, much bigger than Iraq. Iran, it's different. And so it has to be handled politically. There can't be a regime change war in Iran the way there was in Iraq or Libya. Mm-hmm. And look at how long the Syrian civil war took to come to a denouement. Mm-hmm. So, and that's still up in the air too, right? Mm-hmm. But Syria is much smaller. Iran is just different. It's in a different league. And, people will say that as like, oh, well, the U.S. can't fight a war against Iran in the same way. Of course they could, but they don't want to. That's not the point. And so I think that, that just that window into what's changing.
Mm-hmm.
And how Musk is associated with this in some way. Meaning, the amateurishness of Doge.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That Doge doesn't know what it's doing, and that's why it's so dangerous. And it's like, yeah, but that's also what makes it salutary. And then that also is the politics of it. Meaning, the American people hired, through the electoral system, they hired a change in management, and they chose the people who don't know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Very deliberately. They chose the people who don't know what they're doing. Meaning, obviously, the Democrats represent the people who know what they're doing, and yet that has not turned out well, has it? In the COVID era and whatnot.
No.
Right? The rule of experts has come to grief. And so bring in the amateurs, please.
What did you think of my conversation with Studebaker about the amateur character of Trump and how he's reminding everyone of the the Chinese negotiators and
well, you mean the that they're untrustworthy?
Yeah. Right.
They're untrustworthy. I think that his analysis is good as far as it goes, but I'm not sure that's the essence of it. I mean, he said other things about the Chinese negotiation that I think is more important, which is that Xi might need a lifeline from Trump.
Mm-hmm.
That's more important, actually, than the deniability of the intermediaries.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because, sure, both sides will play games. And in some ways, the Chinese will play games more even than Trump will play games.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe China needs it more than Trump does. Maybe Xi needs it more than Trump does.
Mm-hmm.
The renegotiation. Because the Chinese economy is in trouble. It is. It has not recovered the same way. And, and it is misrepresented by them. Again, for political reasons.
Right.
And, and they do have a more dicey, fragile system. They do, especially under Xi. Because under Xi, the more technocratic aspect of things has been sacrificed in favor of strongman rule. And that comes at a cost.
Right. Well, the same thing's happening with Trump in a way, right? It's a bit more strongman rule, not so technocratic.
You mean like loyalism? Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, though, like Xi has the Communist Party, Trump doesn't have anything. Trump doesn't even have Jared and Ivanka anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, he only had them, really. And it turns out he didn't really have them. He doesn't really have Melania. Like, Trump is really by himself there. In a profound way. I mean, there's Don Jr. and Eric, but, and so, I guess he needed a friend. And that was Elon Musk or something.
Right.
But then he has these other friends like Scott Bessent, and then he has to choose between his friends. So, I mean, I think that, the unreliability, I mean, look, Trump has the prerogative of power, meaning it's the United States. It is ultimately the United States. And the real issue is not Trump's unreliability. The real issue is whether Trump's policies are subject to such bureaucratic sabotage as to be unreliable for that reason. In other words, can the U.S. be trusted to fulfill Trump's deals when you have such bureaucratic sabotage of his policies? That's the real danger. Not the amateurishness, no. The amateurishness makes them very trustworthy. The untrustworthiness comes from the deep state, comes from the bureaucratic sabotage.
Right.
And
I agree with that.
I think that Tulsi just gave a speech recently at maybe the Turning Points USA conference, where she was talking about how the deep state is in every department, constantly sabotaging.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's just true. Right? So they're going to, I mean, the other thing about international affairs is that in some ways, and this is again what the Democrats will say. They'll say, oh, Trump likes Kim Jong-un and he likes Xi Jinping and he likes Vladimir Putin. And what they're really saying is he likes them more than he likes us. Right? Meaning, like, maybe Trump will trust Putin more than he'll trust his own intelligence agencies. I mean, I think he said so in his first term.
Well, there are two things to bring up in response to that, but I'll just go to the obvious one, which is that Kash Patel has apparently launched an investigation into
Brennan,
Comey and John Brennan.
Yep.
Yeah, and both of them, and
CIA and FBI.
Yep, and with good cause, with good reason.
Oh, of course, with very good cause. Absolutely.
Right.
No, totally, and I'm all for it. I think that I wrote this a while ago about how the Russiagate people were under investigation and maybe some of them were going to go to jail, and I think one of them did briefly. But yeah, that's still ongoing, right? I mean, you mentioned Kash Patel, so that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino have supposedly been body snatched by the deep state over the Epstein files.
Oh, right, yeah.
you know. And I didn't want to bring that up in the article because I thought that Musk mentioning the Epstein files in a tweet was just evidence of his personality disorder.
It's much more current. Like people compare it to the JFK files, right? And it's much more.
No,
current.
this is current. Yeah, this is people.
Right. So the need for classification from the state's point of view, not from my point of view.
Yeah, the state's point of view. They jealously guard. Yeah, their secrets, their information.
But also the character of it is, it's just not.
You know, also for prosecution purposes, right? So prosecutors also keep things secret in order to protect their cases.
Right.
You know.
Right.
And you know, I mean, Epstein himself is dead, but you know, perhaps there are other cases to be brought against his associates, right? And so you don't want to ruin the possibility of prosecuting people by releasing information prematurely.
Right. I just feel like the Epstein story is so murky and strange that it doesn't.
And anti-Semitic.
And anti-Semitic, and it just doesn't have.
Yeah, I brought it up in my Bonapartism article.
Mm-hmm. Just my instinct is to say, you know, this is okay. I would like this to be revealed just because I want the state not to be able to hold secrets like this. And of course,
you know, there are conspiracy theories from the 19th century, from the era of Louis Bonaparte and from his regime that are still unsettled.
Right. Well,
and will always be.
Right. But all I'm getting at, what I'm trying to say is, I just somehow or another am not so
including
moved.
Stuff that Marx trafficked in himself.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. He wrote a whole book, Herr Vogt, about like a socialist who he accused of being an agent of Louis Bonaparte and the Tsar. And then it turned out to be true. But Marx couldn't have definitively known. And so, you know, and a lot of people, a lot of Marx's collaborators, contemporaries, friends are like, what are you doing, man? You're going off on this tangent. You're writing a whole book about this guy? Like, what are you doing? It turns out maybe it was warranted, but, you know, but it's also like, I think it's the essence, the way I put it is, you know, paranoia, conspiracy theories, it's the essence of Bonapartism. It's, you know, if you go back to your old situationism, everyone's a terrorist, everyone's a secret agent.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you know, and taking that more seriously, like in other words, that's like a kind of a cute trope. It's kind of amusing as a thought figure, but it's also true. And by the way, let me just say that part of the Russiagate collusion hoax was the argument that Democrats made, that people like Comey and Brennan made, was that Trump might be a Russian asset without knowing it.
Right.
That's real too. But again, there's nothing to be done about that. Meaning he's elected president, he's a political figure, he's making decisions. Is he, unbeknownst to himself, a Putin asset? It doesn't matter. It's going to play out in the political sphere. It's not going to play out at the level of who has what on whom and who's being manipulated in what kind of super subtle way, according to like KGB, super sophisticated. I mean, the thing is, I think the CIA and the KGB, I think they do evil things. They've done evil things. I don't think that they're all this powerful, sophisticated, competent. I don't.
Right.
You know, like, if you just think for a second, it's like, okay, you know, they're sophisticated at certain things. They have like certain technical sophistication, but can they really pull off what everyone thinks they can lay responsibility on them for? No.
Well, it depends on what you mean by pull off. Whether, you know,
it seems like there's a lot of ham-fisted stuff, like meaning like,
no, but sometimes the ham-fisted stuff works is all.
No, it works. What I'm saying is the idea that I mean, I guess you can get away with things by accident too, you know, but that they're so good at like doing things that you can't even see them doing it, and no one will ever know.
Just one more thought on this Epstein thing. Let's see if I can articulate this thought. It seems to me that we overall should want transparency. We should want public participation in politics. We should be allergic to conspiracies and not fall into the trap of dismissing the possibility of conspiracies
I
happening.
mean, there are conspiracies. The question
Right.
is, how determinative of historical events are they?
Right. I'm not talking about how determinative they are. I'm just saying, like, the impulse to expose government corruption is a good one, I think, ultimately.
Isn't
And
conspiracy theory serving the system?
well, I think it depends. I mean, well, first of all, okay, this is what I'm trying to
Keeps us
get at.
distracted.
I think that I'll just say it directly. When I've looked into the JFK stuff recently, what I've been struck by the most is the group of people who had, from the very earliest days, tried to expose the truth by reading the actual Warren Commission report and being very reasonable and rigorous with it. And really, they were, like
They
I
just
said,
had congressional testimony from the surgeon who was
Right.
talking about the different wounds and how there had to be shots from different places. And I think you were maybe talking
Yeah.
about this. You were talking
Yeah,
about
I
this
did.
with Ben
Yeah.
Studebaker. And, and obviously the media has given it like no attention or whatever. It's
Mhm.
treated as like a Republican sideshow distraction,
Mhm.
but yet there is, right, there's evidence.
Right. And so I feel like, on the one hand, that impulse to try to get to the truth and be rigorous and journalistic, or even be just a good lawyer, which is what Mark Lane was,
Mhm.
is noble. And these people should actually be considered sort of heroes, I think, because some of them sacrificed their
Yeah,
careers and their
yeah,
reputations for this.
yeah.
On the other hand, the delight that people take in not knowing and being able to speculate is not healthy. The paranoia and the
The paranoia is certainly not healthy.
expansive explanations, and that is not useful. And I think that is encouraged more than real rigorous investigation to
I mean, I think,
what we
okay,
can know.
so I can explain my active disinterest in this kind of stuff,
Mhm.
which is that I think that ruling class politics is going to have this character.
Mhm.
It's
Right.
going to be sordid, grubby, criminal,
Mhm.
and the state is going to be complicit and
Mhm.
is going to be an active participant in organized crime as part of its repressive role
Right.
in the political sphere.
Mhm.
I think that a socialist movement is very vulnerable,
Mhm.
right? Like, we're without any kind of insulation that even like well placed, like rich people, capitalists, politicians, and bureaucratic officers, and yet they're all very vulnerable too. Meaning,
Mhm.
I have in mind, like, Adorno wrote Reflections on Class Theory, and it's part
Mhm.
of the racket theory that Horkheimer and Adorno took up from the general milieu, from the general
Mhm.
like intellectual milieu of the time. The theory of rackets. It's not original to them, but they took it up as a phenomenon, as an appearance of things under fascism, under Stalinism, but also under FDR New Dealism.
Mhm.
And they described it as the proletarianization of the capitalist class, meaning were members of the capitalist class disposable the way the proletarianized working class was disposable? Yes. In other
Mhm.
words, like, prominence in civil society, property, wealth, position, power, status was no protection at all.
Mhm.
You fall out of favor, you're just ruthlessly done away with. And obviously, it's most drastically demonstrated by the Nazis and by the Stalinists, but it's
Mhm.
also true in liberal democracy.
Right. And I guess what I'm saying is, within the milieu of socialism, within our own
Mm-hmm.
milieu, we ought not to treat people that way.
No, no,
And
no. Obviously, we cannot. Like, we
right.
should
And
not. We cannot.
right.
Yeah.
And we also shouldn't be so cavalier with the truth either.
No, we
Right.
shouldn't be cavalier with the truth. No, no, no. But I think that what we need to know is this is not the kind of politics we want to be part of. Now,
Right.
Now, so I'm just thinking like Lenin and the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks,
Mm-hmm.
Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, as opposed to the Narodniks, the socialist revolutionaries,
Mm-hmm.
who were all caught up in this stuff and who were
Mm-hmm.
fully riddled with czarist agents.
Mm-hmm.
And where, like, czarist agents within the socialist revolutionaries were killing their bureaucratic opponents within the state. Like, state people were killing each other by using these revolutionaries,
Mm-hmm.
these terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and I think we have to remember the socialist revolutionaries were much more prominent, numerous, powerful than the Marxists.
Right.
And, you know, so that was the left. That is the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be the Marxists,
Right.
you know? And so that's the thing. We can't be like the anarchists. We can't be like these, you know, radical liberal, you know, petty bourgeois Democrat, you know, terrorists. We can't. Like, in other words, there's something to that politics where this comes with the territory.
Mm-hmm.
And what we need to build is something that is not that. Right? Because
Right.
that's the way in which the left is complicit in capitalist politics. So there's a kind of a cynicism, there's a glorification of violence. There's and you know, this is what got me into trouble on the Palestine issue, where I was just like, look, it's in the very nature of this that it's capitalist politics.
Mm-hmm.
Terrorism is capitalist politics,
Right.
inherently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's hard because what we are trying to champion is something that simply doesn't exist. That did exist, but it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And because Stalinism had a veneer of respectability, state power, diplomacy, politics, you know, but no, it was totally caught up in this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like the East Bloc intelligence services fostered all sorts of terrorism. They did. And they were totally up to their elbows in organized crime.
Right. Here's my naive liberalism. I think that a Marxist left in the Soviet Union, right?
And a lot of good it did them, by the way. In other words, it did not lead to socialism. It led to a total collapse. You know, like all that sacrifice, all that venality, criminality, all those compromises, all that opportunism, it was just shit. It led nowhere.
I think after like 1930, let's say, in the Soviet Union, if you were a real actual Marxist socialist, one of the things you might do is try to, through Samizdat newspapers, report on the criminality of the Soviet regime and the
bureaucracy,
keep track of who's being disappeared.
The bureaucracy. I mean, the funny thing is, so it's not like criminality per se. It's that bureaucratism is criminality.
Right.
In other words, it's inseparable from criminality. And that's what people don't understand. That, you know, because it seems like bureaucracy is like the opposite of criminality. But no, that's the way in which it becomes complicit in criminality.
The Russiagate story exposes precisely that. How they, when they need to, and they very frequently need to, they break their own rules and guidelines. And
by the way, you know, it used to be said, you know, this was like a kind of a truism. The most dangerous position to be in like the East Bloc, was to be a party member. In other words, like you were most subject to state repression if you were actually part of the bureaucratic state apparatus.
Right.
And that's because, again, the way the bureaucracy deals with itself is inherently criminal. I mean, this is what Marx wrote about the Second Empire, about Louis Bonaparte. This is what he wrote about. You know, in other words, we know this. As Marxists, we know this. We don't have to like go to Max Weber or Robert Michels. Like, we don't need any 20th century sociology of politics or anything. We
Mhm.
kind of knew this, and it has to do with the decomposition of the political sphere and the state as a political entity in the capitalist era.
Right.
And so there's something charmingly naive about Trump and Musk. I mean, so Musk.
But this is what I'm getting
Yeah.
at. I think that being charmingly naive and knowing this are not in opposition. That there are times when the role of a Marxist is to be charmingly naive and report and remember and to tell the truth, despite the fact that it's predictable.
Oh, of course. No,
Yeah.
I think that's right. I mean, look, like the journalistic angle, yes, I agree. I do. Although, of course, one has to be careful because one doesn't want to make an enemy of people that you can't defend yourself.
You can get killed. You can easily get killed.
Yeah.
This happens, and it happens in the United States.
Of course it does.
Right? Yeah.
Of course it does. Yeah. And it will happen. And, and I think that one of the things that we have to do at a tactical level, but also at a more strategic, broader level, in terms of the campaign for a socialist party, we have to navigate a field of action that's permeated by all sorts of skullduggery. I think I mentioned to you that I want us to take up civil disobedience against the deportations. That's going to be dangerous, of course.
Right.
And yet there is a way of doing it to avoid gratuitous exposure and vulnerability. Because we're going to be immediately in the milieu of capitalist politics, cartels. We're going to be in with, the state actors. It's going to be, there's going to be an immediate danger, ugliness to it. And yet there is also a way of dealing with it. We have the civil rights movement as a precedent for that. So, because really what's going on now, like the terrorism, like the ambushing of like ICE people, and then the rioting, and then the Democratic Party politicians getting arrested outside of detention centers, like the state can deal with all that really easily. Easily. No, we have to adopt a practice and tactics and a strategy that actually the state can't deal with so easily.
Right. Do you think, Chris, that Trump has created a kind of change that will make it easier for people like you and me to organize?
I think the possibilities of organizing are just there. I don't know if Trump makes it better or worse. We have to take advantage of the situation as it presents itself. So, for instance, the fact that Trump has let loose a kind of bureaucratic apparatus, which is clumsily going for the low-hanging fruit, right? Because it's easier than actually going directly after the human traffickers and cartels. And that Trump himself is maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Maybe we shouldn't be raiding farms and hotels and restaurants, and though we might need that kind of labor. And I'm not talking about amnesty, but no, just deprioritize it. But then, of course, once you set this bureaucratic police apparatus in motion, it's going to want to score victories. It's going to want to meet quotas. And the easiest way to do that is going to be to prey on the vulnerable people. Right? And so there's just an inherent injustice to the whole thing. But also there's an inherent injustice to the whole thing. This would be true under Biden or Obama or whoever, meaning it's in the nature of the state itself. So, but whereas Biden and Obama kept it very opaque, what were their intentions? What were they trying to do? Well, the advantage with Trump is that he's just says what he wants. It's completely unguarded, and it might work against his administration and what they're trying to do. So it's I think we take advantage of that. At some level. Now, we're not guided by that, but that creates some kind of a opportunity. But the other more difficult thing is, this would not be done for publicity's sake.
Right.
It wouldn't be done as a media spectacle. In other words, I think that we would aim to be successful, and a measure of success would be it going under the radar. In other words, working with employers, working with like labor unions, like dealing with the realm of the modus vivendi, which is to say the kind of thing that the state would not want publicized because it would be embarrassing to them that they're unable to operate as they would want to, right? Whereas if you grandstand it, then it gives them an easy kind of like win, like, see, we're doing something, like, in other words, if like the publicity mongering that the Democrats and the left are engaged in,
right,
is something that just serves the state, whereas we'd be acting in a completely different way. And also, obviously the employers, they don't want to be rated, but then also it serves their purposes ultimately too, because it keeps the workers vulnerable and in line in a way. So we have to navigate, a lot of entrenched interests, including the labor unions that are just operating as a wing of the Democratic Party and have a conflict of interest in terms of, actual organizing versus their political commitments. So we'd be, in a sense, pushing on all sorts of inconvenient soft spots, which will make things more dicey. And yet it's also an opportunity. And it's a long-standing issue. It's like a 20-year issue, going back to 2006, the mass demonstrations around the Sensenbrenner bill, the comprehensive immigration reform that both parties have been promising. So anyway, but of course, immediately I'm thinking, oh, well, we're going to be vulnerable to a lot, and yet we have to find a way to operate.
Well, I do think that these kinds of efforts should be written about, that should be documented, but just the question is how and for whom.
I had asked Sean KB to write something on what he had observed in a migrant shelter in New York, and he was wary of doing so because he didn't want to like rat out people, right? But he was seeing like the collusion between the Democratic Party, employers, unions, organized crime. Like it was just like
right there,
obvious. It was just right there, right?
Well, you could write it as somewhat fictional. Set it
exactly. So that's the thing. So that's exactly the thing, is that I just thought, oh well, there is a way of doing this, but it does take a certain level of sophistication, and so there are ways of doing it where you can get the essence of the phenomenon across without giving away any details as to personal information,
right?
Because we want to protect not only people as informants, but we'd want to protect ourselves and our ability to continue to do this.
Right.
So there are ways of doing it, and we are going to have to keep a record, document our experience, because that's what we're ultimately trying to do. We're trying to train the next generations of socialist activists for the prospect of a real socialist party and a real bid for power at some point. But we have to take baby steps, and so but we also have to take steps. They have to actually be steps. So anyway, but coming back to it, obviously the shadow realm of appearances, like the phantasmagoria of capitalist politics, and it's a media spectacle, and the discourse, and writing for Compact, and Elon Musk, and what do I know about Elon Musk, and what am I going to know about him? Nothing, and yet you can sort of, it is a window into things. It does give you some perspective on the essence of things, which is, okay, there are high stakes maintaining Pax Americana and how it's done. So if the goals are the same, if Trump has the same goals as Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, because he does, and that shouldn't be a disappointment to anyone.
Yeah.
Right? Still, the way of doing it matters. It's all that matters in a way. All that they have is tactics. All that they have is this kind of stuff, methods, means, and means ends rationality. I didn't invoke Lukács, but I might have. That capitalism is a means ends reversal. It's a means that becomes an end in itself.
Right.
And it's bourgeois enough, it's humanistic enough to maintain a veneer of it not being the ends of capital or a means as an end in itself, but rather humanity perpetuating itself. And yet it's also an alienated society. That's why I brought in Durkheim.
Mhm.
You know, like, okay, well, what about the fact that society uses us to perpetuate itself? And of course, we are society. We're not just Homo sapiens. We're also people. We're members of this thing, society. And, you know, Citizen Trump and Citizen Musk, they're members of
Right.
society too. You know, because I think that what the left does is that they really dehumanize the capitalists, and they dehumanize the politicians, and they dehumanize the state actors. You know, it's the fascist insects, as the Symbionese Liberation Army communiques would call them.
Mhm.
You know, they turn into just these monsters. They're sociopaths. They're psychotic. You know, American Psycho. You know, and it's like that's not going to do. That's not going to do. You know,
Right.
we can't leave it at that level, because, by the way, if we do that about the capitalist class and their politicians, that's a habit of mind. This is what the left does to each other.
Right.
You know,
The thing about American Psycho,
Uh-huh.
I've seen the movie finally.
Uh-huh.
The thing about that movie is what makes it worth watching is the fact that it makes you identify with the American Psycho.
Yes. Yes.
That
Oh,
is why
yes.
it's worth
They can't
watching.
make that movie anymore.
Right.
Not the same way. I think
Right.
we've shied away. There was a moment, like the 90s and the early zeros, people were able to really entertain these problems.
hmm
Whereas now they're really not.
Right.
You know, it's just human good guys versus inhuman bad guys. I mean, I wrote about this in Ozark. So I actually think Matthew Schmitz, the editor who solicited the article for me, he did want, I think that he even said that he wanted me to do a treatment of Musk as a bourgeois hero, a la the Ozark article.
Right. Yeah.
You know, because he really liked that article. And I really liked that article.
Mhm.
And that was an article that I pitched to them. They didn't solicit that. I pitched that to them.
Mhm.
And yet, right, there is this question of the anti-hero, right? Like, can we really have anti-heroes? Like, I feel like, you know, the genre, you know, that fits into like Ozark and Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, it is a step down from Sopranos.
Mhm.
Tony Soprano was an anti-hero in a way that I don't think we can bear anymore.
Right.
And that's what you're talking about with the Christian Bale character in American Psycho.
Right.
We can't really
Yeah.
bear that.
Right.
You know?
Well, listen, I want to talk to you in the second half about some stuff that's going on in the after parties and how things are going at Sublation, but also about your essay or your presentation, Beyond History.
Each of Benjamin and Adorno.
Right. And so why don't we wrap this up here? But people should go and read the What Musk and Trump Still Have in Common essay. And yeah, this is a good conversation. And we do need to be able to think of the humanity, even of the bourgeois.
Even
or
of the
capitalism.
inhumanity. The humanity that persists in the inhumanity of capitalism.
Because if we can't recognize the humanity that persists in the inhumanity of the capitalist class or capitalism, we're not going to really be able to find our own.
We're not going to be able to find it in the working class either.
Right. Or in ourselves.
Or in ourselves.
You know?
Right.
Right.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much.
All right. I'll leave it there.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.